what was the main reason why somebody would be successful?
I nailed down to two. One is mindset. A lot of people come out, the people that are really, at day one, you can tell because they could be 45 years old and they're tired of spending in and out of prison for the last 25 years of their adult life. And they come out and say, you know what, I'm done with this lifestyle and I'm nailing it. I'm going to go find a job. I'm going to do this and this. And they're off and running. Awesome. So a lot of it's mindset. And some of them want it, but they don't quite how to do it. You can give them some help, whether you help coach them with some job search stuff, or you get them into a job search program, or maybe some mental health because they don't know how to manage relationships that are toxic or whatever. And you help some little things out, or obviously drug or alcohol abuse if you need to get them some help there to kind of work through that. So a lot of it's mindset, but a lot of it too, the biggest one on the risk factor tool that we use is who they hang out with, their social network. And I'll tell them the very first day they come into the office or I see them at their house and say, here's the deal. If you have crappy friends, you're not going to make it. Let's talk about that. Who are you hanging out with? We can't go back to the block. I know it's tough, especially with younger offenders, especially the gang guys and gals going back to the neighborhood. It's really, really tough to get out of that. And to a degree, some reservation cases too, going back to that same community, you got to get them out of there if you can. But nonetheless, to answer your question, it's social networks. That's it. If you have crappy friends, you are not going to make it. If it's the same friends you had before that don't care about you and they're going to continue to use and commit crimes or whatever, we might as well just get the war started now because you're not going to make it.
Okay, can you introduce yourself for me, please?
My name is Kevin Hocevar. I live in Meridian, Idaho. I'm married with a wife and two teenagers, a 15-year-old and 17-year-old. I'm a retired Deputy Chief US Probation Officer.
Okay. Kevin, you got a long and storied career, so we've got a lot of stuff to talk about, but give me a little bit of idea of your family life growing up. And was there anything growing up that led you to law enforcement?
Yeah, okay. Well, I grew up a military brat. My stepdad, whose last name I use, Hocevar, was a F4 pilot in the Marine Corps, so he retired in the mid-70s. Interesting note, my biological dad was killed in Vietnam about a month after I was born. I have a twin sister and a younger sister. But with that, I have a lot of military in my family. Um, Grew up in North Idaho for the most part. Actually, when my dad retired, we moved up to Coeur d'Alene, lived up there. Went to college in the mid 80s, off to North Dakota for a couple of years, junior college, went in the Marine Corps myself, then started my career. Didn't get married to about 34, 35 years old, didn't have kids till I was 40. Um, Really at no time, I wasn't born wanting to be a police officer or fireman and things like that. When I first started college, I was wanting to be a game warden, which is what I originally went to school for, wildlife biology in North Dakota, and soon realized that I wasn't real competitive trying to get these summer jobs with the Fish and Game Office in North Dakota because I couldn't run a combine or a tractor, and all these other kids that were from North Dakota could. And that's one thing that prompted me to join the Marine Corps as a military policeman to get some experience to hopefully jumpstart a career after that. Um, so that's kind of how it started. So
But we talked a little bit about this before, but you had like a 3.9 in college. So were you always a studious kid, even in high school? Did you turn it around in college?
I turned around my first 2 years when I went to North Dakota. I was not a good student. It's not that I didn't try. This sounds weird, but I didn't know how to study. It's a
No,
maturity issue.
yeah.
I was interested in, playing baseball, drinking beer, and, duck hunting really when I went to North Dakota. But I was trying, but at the time I was just immature. And that's one reason after my freshman year, I realized I wasn't getting summer jobs, that I need to grow up a little bit. And I went right down to the Marine Corps recruiter. I know one day later and signed up. My mom wasn't real happy about that, but I was delayed entry. So it was a year before I'd actually go to boot camp. But going into my sophomore year of college, I knew I was going to the Marine Corps.
Yeah.
And that was probably the best decision I ever made. Spent
When you got into the Marine Corps, obviously you got it for experience. Was there ever, because you bounced around in a lot of different agencies and got a lot of experience, was there ever a goal in your mind of what you wanted to do?
Right. So when I was in the Marine Corps, I was an MP on the East Coast, a traditional MP, law enforcement work in base,
Okay.
security and law enforcement patrol stuff. I went into embassy duty, which is a B billet in the Marine Corps. So it's a 3-year tour with the Department of State. You're actually operationally under Department of State, diplomatic security. You're still in the Marine Corps, but you're assigned to the MSG battalion out of Quantico, Marine Security Group Battalion is what it's called. but you're basically attached to the Department of State, diplomatic security. And during those travels, I was in Warsaw, Poland for a year in the early 90s. Then I started getting exposed to federal officers, such as US Marshals, coming to train the Poles for court security, things like that. My second tour was in Jamaica, Kingston. Huge DEA presence down there. Actually, a big presence, drug interdiction presence. And this is, 91, 92, things like that. So then I started meeting DEA agents and some ATF guys that were coming down and other diplomatic security people. And that's when I decided I want to go federal in some way or form. DA stuck in my brain, US Marshals, FBI, Secret Service, even Fish and Wildlife Service, Forest Service, things like that. So I knew when I got out, I was going to try federal. So after 5.5 years in the Marine Corps, had a great time. I moved back to Idaho and went back to undergraduate. And that's when I became a good student, because I was a little bit older. I was still a little nervous whether I could do it, but once you get in, it's all just discipline. And I rolled out with, solid grades, and it wasn't an issue. But yeah, so I did do the switch, to answer your question. It just took about 6 years before I made that switch. But
so that time with your Marines kind of really gave you a focus on where you were going to go, where you wanted to go. So when you got out of the Marines, you started working for the Clearwater County Sheriff's Office. Explain that, because it was a very unique program.
Right. So I was undergraduate at Lewis Clark State College here in Idaho, up in Lewiston, which is North Idaho. They had a program. Clearwater County, the county seat is Orofino. It's a small county, but Dworshak Reservoir is there, the Clearwater River. County's not that populated. It might be, at the time, I don't think it's more than 20,000 people in the whole county. But they had a program for college kids. There's really two of us that were doing it, one from the University of Idaho, myself from Lewis Clark State, that they had a seasonal Marine deputy program. And you were deputized. You qualified, you carried, we wore shorts to work, but we had all the gear on, and we ran boats for boat patrol, Marine patrol up on Dworshak Reservoir primarily. A lot of it's community interaction, teaching boat safety to kids and providing, life jackets, things like that. But we're patrolling too, because every once in a while we'd get a drunk boater causing problems, or they're crashing their boat, or, we'd have to take some action, make some arrests, things like that. But most of it was just community interaction on just really teaching boat safety. But that program specifically, you had to be a college student. So I did it for 3 years, or 3 seasons, basically May to October. But once I graduated, I couldn't be in the program anymore. So, but it was a great opportunity, because one, it was a job that paid pretty good at the time, and great experience. And
maybe this didn't happen a lot. Were you pulling out any bodies?
We were. So unfortunately, the Clearwater River runs right along Highway 12 in Idaho, that runs east to west up over to Montana, Lola Pass. And on occasion, once or twice a summer, there's a vehicle accident where a car goes in the river and they don't find the body. So we'd be out on jet skis and jet boats. We had both, searching for bodies on the Clearwater River. And we eventually find them.
How old were you at that time?
I was 26, 27, 28.
How is that, looking for bodies when you're that young?
Yeah, I've seen a couple of dead bodies when I was in the Marine Corps, some suicide stuff. But yeah, when you pull a body out of a river that's been in there for a couple of weeks, because bodies start to decompose and they bloat, the gases start, and that's how they rise to the top. And that's usually how you find them. Usually, some passerby in a car drives by and say, "Hey, there's a body floating down the river." But that's not a pretty sight, and the smell, it's not good. Because typically when a body comes out of the water after it doesn't look anything like a human.
Yeah,
it looks like a marshmallow man or something like that.
Yeah.
And typically pigment's gone, and it's tragic, because then the family has to come and try to ID the body, and it's it's tragedy all the way around when you see that stuff. That we had some kayaking deaths up on the North Fork of the Clearwater, where some kayakers got pinned and one gentleman died. Even down on the main Salmon River down in Riggins, one of the jet boat companies that's down there, it's still down there, but the owner, I think the originator, went off the road one night on the Big Salmon, which is big water, and they never found his body. So they called us to help. We had some resources that Idaho County didn't. And we spent a couple of days up there on jet skis, running big rapids, basically running tanks for scuba divers, searching these big holes. And again, it was a couple of weeks before that body surfaced. Yeah. We couldn't find it. So it's always tough, to see that stuff.
Okay, so after you get done with the Clearwater County, you start working as a juvenile probation officer in Nez Perce. First of all, for the audience, can you explain where Nez Perce is?
And Nez Perce, Lewiston, Idaho, is the county seat for Nez Perce County, which is in north central Idaho.
Okay. And how much of Nez Perce is actually Indian Reservation?
I don't know percentage. I mean, that Nez Perce Indian Reservation covers parts of Idaho County, Clearwater County, and Nez Perce County.
Yeah.
I don't know the exact square mileage.
Okay.
But kind of one of the tribal, the city of Lap or the town of Lapway, which I believe is the tribal headquarters. That is in Nez Perce County, but there's a couple other towns
Okay.
on the reservation that.
So why juvenile probation?
I was just graduating. I was no longer working in Clearwater County, and I needed a job straight up. And I was working some part-time stuff at the juvenile probation office as a tracker, which is just basically tracking kids down and kind of following up on just little stuff. But at the time, I needed a job, and I was offered a full-time juvenile probation job there. And it was 2 years. It was a great job. It's the first time I had an office job post Marine Corps, which was a lot of learning things for me, how to work in an office with a team, which is totally foreign to me. Not that I'm a team guy, but just those dynamics, and had a great mentor as a chief probation officer there that taught me a lot. But the whole time, I'm brewing on the Fed stuff, applying. The internet had just come on board, believe it or not. This is the early 90s, I guess, mid 90s. So that's, yeah. So I was always, doing Fed job searches, things like that. But the juvenile stuff was good.
Yeah. What were you doing? What were you doing?
I was running a caseload. So basically a caseload in the community, both out on the reservation and as well as other parts of the county. We had 5 or 6 probation officers there that each had a caseload of kind of, if I can remember, 30, 40, kids.
So when kids get in trouble, you're supervising them?
Right. So basically they're sentenced to a
Okay.
period of probation or something like that, or some term of supervised release. They don't
Okay.
all go to jail or all go to juvenile detention, but yeah,
Any
post-conviction.
any difference of working the non-Indian reservation versus regular?
There is, yeah, and it goes even later into my career. We call it Indian land cases. The tribes, there's some really good tribes to work with, but definitely different culture.
Mhm.
And I was always very respectful of that, very inquisitive of the Nez Perce culture and the Coeur d'Alene culture. I worked up there and even down south on my Fed time working the Shoshone Paiute reservation. But it's different. Yeah, it's just a different, it's not good or bad. It's just different where, it's hard to explain. The culture on reservations is there's a lot of pressure for young kids and young people to stay on the reservation, not to leave. Even though sometimes you want it, especially as in my adult career, trying to get them to get out of their community and to something new to kind of give them a fresh start with a new job and new skills and new friends. But it's tough. There's a lot of pressure on young people to stay on the res and not leave. That doesn't mean some don't.
Yeah.
But some reservations are a little more difficult to work with than others. There's a reservation in Idaho that's very difficult. They don't like law enforcement that's not tribal, whether it's federal or local. And there's a lot of tension. Not all reservations are like that.
Yeah.
But really, but luckily on the Nez Perce tribe, they had a juvenile probation officer through the tribal court, and we worked closely with them, and they worked with us. And so it's all about those relationships, trying to, be respectful and learn, and how you can be effective with, especially juveniles and their families.
Yeah, and I think we had talked about this before, but you had mentioned that the kids were cool, but the parents weren't so awesome. And not just the Indian reservations, but
sure.
in general, right?
In general, yeah.
Can you explain that a little bit?
Sometimes you get some young kids that have been in trouble, and you go into their home life and see their parents or their siblings, and you're like, oh, that makes sense. And sometimes the parents, they're mad at the system, like, how dare you, arrest and charge my kid? And we didn't charge them. We just got the case afterwards. But and the parents are bitter. Maybe they're embarrassed. I don't know, to have your 14-year-old child on supervision or on probation term, or has gone to juvenile detention and come out, or but sometimes the parents are more difficult. The kids were always, I could deal with them. Once in a while you get a hardcore kid that's pretty high risk and doesn't give a rip about anything, and they're going to do what you want. But also you see parents that do everything right, and their kid still turns out to be a knucklehead. I mean, so it's not all, everything's right, but the kid just has some tendencies for some criminal thinking and activities, and running a gun in the streets and things like that. But
your next job is with Seattle Pretrial. Why do you leave Idaho? How do you end up Seattle? How you end up at that job?
That was my first federal. I was always told by the Fed guys, hey, just get your foot in the door with any agency.
Right.
And I was a juvenile probation officer, saw an advertisement in the Seattle Times back when you read the Sunday paper every day. And for a pretrial officer assistant in Seattle, it's a 1-year contract gig. I'm like, I'm going for it. This is my chance to get in the feds. And went over there, interviewed, got hired. It was actually a great job. The pretrial office in Seattle is pretty busy, and in the federal court over the U.S. District Court was busy. By the time I was dating my wife, and she stayed in Idaho, and we still maintain contact. And when I was in Seattle, I was kind of, because they offered me to stay on full time, and I was say, hey, what, you want to come here? And she was really wanting to go to Montana. I'm like, and I was in love with my wife. I still am. She's a great person. And I said, well, okay. So I decided to give up the Fed job that I've been waiting years to get and moved to Montana and got on with the Sheriff's Office of Bozeman, Gallatin County. So that was prompted that move from Idaho to Seattle and Seattle to Montana.
So interesting. How has that changed then? I mean, you've gone from the Marine, you're in juvenile probation, pretrial, you're doing a little bit, Marine or the Marine
Marine deputy stuff.
Marine deputy stuff.
Yeah.
Now you're actually doing, I don't know. Not to say that it wasn't law enforcement before, but now you're doing like
working patrol,
right,
running
patrol.
shifts. Yeah.
How is that?
I knew what I was getting into. Not a whole lot different from the other stuff I'd done, even in the Marine Corps, was shift work. But Gallatin County, the sheriff's office is awesome. It's really good. It's one of the larger, at the time, one of the larger sheriff's offices in Montana. Montana's not that populated, but it had a good reputation. Bozeman was a cool town. It's changed a lot since I was there, but I liked it. Working patrol, I got into the SRT team there. Had great colleagues, good sheriff, good management. There's nothing I didn't like about it. The shift work, I mean, I wasn't married then, even though I was living with my wife. That's a little different for some people. When you're in a relationship, I can only imagine with kids how challenging that would be at times, having to work holidays and weekends and things like that. But no, it was a good experience. Yeah, I enjoyed it.
What kind of training did they offer you? Did you start with? Did you have to go? Here's a question. In Montana, do you have to go to an academy?
You do, yeah. Post academy in Helena.
Okay.
And I don't recall, 12, 14 weeks, something like that. And then come back out to your agency. But I didn't go to the academy. I was working there a year and a half before I got a spot at the academy.
Okay.
But once I started, there's obviously an FTO period for a couple months. I don't recall what it was exactly. So make sure you at least do your job. And
right.
I didn't hit the academy till after a year and a half. So now I'm officially post-certified. There's a window there that you have to get to the academy, and I made it just fine. But that's more about availability and slots. And
so when you start with the sheriff's office and you're on patrol, how old are you when you start?
Oh, I think I'm 30.
Okay, so you got a little bit of life experience behind you.
Yeah.
Nervous at all?
Yeah. First time you go out on patrol and learning the county, learning addresses, and you start getting calls, and
is it more nervous as in worried about your safety, or is it more nervous about, am I going to be able to do the job?
Yeah, that's a good question. It wasn't about doing the job. It's more about facing a situation that maybe you hadn't faced before. Yeah, because it's a dynamic environment.
Yeah.
What kind of call am I going to get? Domestic violence, DUI? Is there a fight at the bar?
Right.
Do we have a lost child, or a dead body floating down the river? There's just 101 different scenarios it's more about that, wanting to get exposed to different things. And I always ask questions to my colleagues, and I had great mentors and FTOs. And so by the time I got an FTO, even though I hadn't been to the academy, I felt comfortable that, okay, if I don't know how to handle this, I've got a colleague or a sergeant that, hey, we're here. I mean, I could mitigate or handle something for a period of time until maybe I get someone there. But nothing ever really happened that wasn't unprepared for.
Well, let me ask you this, because up until this point, I don't really think you have to face this type of situation based on the jobs that you've been doing. Did you ever come to the realization in your mind that you might have to kill somebody?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I've known that from day one.
Okay.
I mean, my Marine Corps, deadly force is
the
Marine Corps. When you're working law enforcement, I mean, in a wartime scenario, war combat's a little different, obviously, but not a whole lot different. But no, I knew that going in, and I just like I think a lot of good officers do. They play scenarios through their mind. You prepare yourself. The things. How could the situation go bad? Don't plan for the best case scenario. Let's plan for the worst case scenario.
Right.
I was constantly running scenarios through my head. Okay, as I'm responding to a domestic violence or a fight at the bar or whatever. Okay, what are the options here? And how could this, even when I'm sitting there talking to a suspect or a defendant, I mean, how could this go bad right now?
Yeah.
Body positioning, my outlets, where's my cover, where's my, my coworker, whatever. I've never had a problem with, because I knew if a deadly force situation presented itself, I had no problem resorting to my training because I was trained well.
Yeah.
And does that mean something can come up where, okay, this is weird, what do I do? I mean, we see it regularly where, but that's the hard part about law enforcement. You have to make split-second decisions based on reasonableness and your training, and that's the key, is stay trained. And both body and mind. And so you're kind of, you never want to get lackadaisical in the job about,
Yeah.
especially when we're interacting with people and there's threats everywhere. Not that we have to run around being paranoid, but prepare yourself. Again, how could this go bad? You and I,
Yeah.
if I don't answer the question right, I mean, but you always run
I
scenarios.
think you'll be all right.
Yeah. So if that answers your question.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah.
So the SRT team, special response team, other places would be called a SWAT
Yep.
team.
Yep.
What made you want to be on that team?
I was on the special response team in the Marine Corps too.
Okay.
At the Marine base, I was out
Okay.
on the East Coast. So I had been to training before, and we'd done call outs stuff before down there. But once I was at Gallatin County and I was eligible and a position came open on SRT, definitely applied a bunch. I always remember it was a 3-day tryout. I don't think we slept for 3 days. It's where I learned that 20 minutes of sleep is amazing, and they taught us to do that. And it was kind of a 3-day where you just don't sleep and you're just shooting and running and just it was a good bonding moment for all the applicants that were trying to get on the team. And
Yeah.
it was it was joint. It was the sheriff's office and the Bozeman Police Department. We had a joint team.
Okay.
We worked out of the same building.
Okay.
Our offices were joined basically. So
if you're working with the police department, if you're on the SWAT team, you're working with the police department and the sheriff's office. Give me an idea of how big of an area are you covering, and if you're on the SWAT team in Montana, in Bozeman, what kind of calls are you reacting to?
yeah. So at the time, I think the county was 70 or 80,000 people. Bozeman being the primary, but it goes all the way down to West Yellowstone, and there's some smaller towns. Now it's much bigger. It's a lot of people in there now. It's actually pretty crowded. Um, Square mileage, I don't recall, but I know from Bozeman to West Yellowstone was, I think it was 90 or 100 miles.
Okay.
It was a chunk.
Yeah.
To get down there. It took a while. So it was a good sized area. I know after I left, they got call outs actually down to Yellowstone to help support the park police. They had some significant things go down in the park where the SRT team out of Bozeman went down to
Oh, wow.
make some arrests and do some work down there.
Okay.
That was a couple years after I left. But most of our call outs were high risk arrest warrants, primarily coming out of the drug task force. That was a joint Missouri River drug task force that worked out of Bozeman. I think I recall one specifically where, this gentleman way out in one of the small communities was waving guns around. He had a warrant, I think, but he's just being kind of a menace to the real small community out there. And we were called out to get him into custody.
Yeah.
Things were going down.
Yeah.
It was just, he was being a threat, a significant threat to people. But so most of them were, to answer your question, most of them were high risk warrants.
Okay.
Based on most of the drug activity.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm assuming things are going well at the sheriff's office. You like it?
Yeah.
You're on the SWAT team. Why do you end up leaving? Why do you go to the US Marshals?
Well, back when I was in pretrial in Seattle, was that late 90s, 96, 97, whatever it was, I had to start applying for the Marshal Service. And it took me, in the mid 90s, it was tough. You and I spoke to get hired on with a lot of agencies. Agencies hiring, yes, but a lot of DOJ agencies were in hiring freezes. You take their test, you'd sit in a pool of candidates for a year, and then they'd have you call you up to take the test again. You sit another year. And that happened with a couple of different agencies. Just a tough, the feds just weren't hiring a lot. Was my perception at the time. And it was tough.
Yeah.
Affirmative action was in play that I'm sure had its place, but honestly, if you're a white guy, and I was told that directly, we're not going to interview you, even though you're qualified. But that's frustrating when you're young or, right out of college trying to get in the feds. But it is what it is, and you just keep rolling. So back to your question, when I left Seattle, I got to know the marshals a lot, including some of the managers there. And I had applied at the time, and you don't apply in with the office; you go through DC. Everything's out of DC. Well, I'm in Bozeman. I'm actually my first week there. I'm in briefing, and I get a phone call. In briefing, at the briefing table with all my colleagues. I'm brand new. And it's the marshals in Seattle wanting to know if I want a job. And everyone's looking at me, but they don't know what I'm talking about. And I had to say no. This Gallatin County just hired me. I have to have some allegiance to them.
Yeah.
I have to. I can't, screw them over like that. So I said I couldn't do it. Even though I wanted to, I just wasn't in a position to take the job. And this was kind of a backdoor channel of communication through some people to say, if you want it, we can get you in. I'm like, oh my gosh, I've been waiting years, and here it is. I mean, my second chance at the feds, nonetheless. So after a couple of years with the sheriff's office there, they actually did call from DC. I think it was about 3 years they called and said, hey, we have a position for you in Idaho if you want it. And at the time, my wife, she's a school psychologist at the school district. You know, like, she wasn't making a lot of money there, and the sheriff's office was paying okay for Montana, but she was kind of getting itching to move back to Idaho or someplace where she can make some more money. And then Marshall's calling on for a job in
Yeah.
Boise. So giddy up, we took it. So and that was 2001.
So what do you do? What are you doing at the marshal's office then?
So yeah, it's 2001. You first go to the academy before you come out to the office. You start with the academy.
So another academy.
Another academy, another 12, 14 weeks down to FLETC, which actually was a fun academy.
Okay, so now wait a minute. Before we start talking about that,
Yeah.
now that you've been through Marine boot camp, you've been through post at Gallatin, you're going through an academy, you've done your SWAT team thing. Are you noticing, is there anything that one person does or one organization does better than the other? How is the difference between all those academies?
Yeah, that's a good question. You know, the Marine Corps Academy, because I went to a military police academy there too.
Oh, okay.
After boot camp,
So
military police academy.
Okay.
At the time, I thought it was interesting, but in hindsight, it was kind of old school. They still practice arrest and handcuffing and scenario-based training, but it was just different, and it was short and compact. And I don't remember a whole lot about it, to be quite honest. But once I got the post in Montana for that 12, 14 weeks, that was a good academy, and they do a great job. And at the time, there's a new director that came in, Howard Webb. He came in there. It kind of turned the academy around, where there's a lot of scenario-based training. Enough of this, I can't explain, but a lot of, when we do defensive tactics, don't try to tweak the pinky 90 degrees. It's all major muscle movement and scenarios, and let's go through scenarios and scenarios and scenarios. That's where you learn, which I grasped onto that technique of learning, as opposed to just reading it in a book or watching someone do something. It's all scenario-based experience, which he brought in there, which I thought was incredible. So that post academy in Montana, I don't know how it is now. That's how it was then. I know he was somewhat revolutionary when he came in there, and I know some police chiefs and sheriffs weren't happy with his teaching style. I think he came out of Oregon, one of the academies out of Oregon. Nonetheless, the students loved him, and we loved the academy just because we learned a lot in real life stuff. Let's see, you want to compare. Oh, okay, then into FLETC. So with the U.S. Marshals at 12 or 14 weeks, again, that was real similar to Montana stuff. A lot of scenario-based stuff, a lot of fighting, a lot of firearms, a lot of restraint stuff, a lot of filming you as you're acting and fighting each other, and which is helpful. You get to see yourself, and you learn scenarios, and here's some options, and thinking about what we talked about earlier, that mindset about preparing yourself for any situation. How could this go bad? And I need to prepare myself just in your mind, so you're prepared. When it does go bad, you're not surprised because you just run these scenarios through your head. So they're very similar, post to Montana and FLETC down at for the Marshal Service.
The reason I ask is I remember guys that were in my academy at Quantico, former Marines, military guys, and some of them weren't happy with the way that they were getting treated. Like, I don't want to say like little kids, but it wasn't an easy academy per se. But, these guys had been through the Marines and everything else. And I just wondered, you being in the military, did you find it, I'm assuming you found it helpful, good.
Right, because that's a great point. The Marshal Service Academy is very militaristic. 90% of the class is military.
Okay.
You play these games. It didn't affect any of us. We just laughed. They try to thrash you in the mud and yell at you, get you up at 3 a.m. And it's just a game. And you have to think about, this is just a game you play to get to the end. Stay in it, stay committed, give it everything you have, and everything will be fine.
Yeah.
But if that's new to you, well, just like Marine Corps boot camp. I mean, I was 20 when I went in. That was an eye opener. Even though my dad was a Marine and my uncles were, they didn't tell me about that. But that's an eye opener when you're a young man or woman to roll into Marine Corps boot camp for 13 weeks.
Yeah.
But you soon, those that make it, not that it's a huge attrition rate, but I think 15% wash out for whatever reasons. But you just you just play the game.
Yeah.
It's just a game. You don't take it personal. Just like your academy.
Yeah.
Drop the ego at the door.
Yeah.
This is just the next 12, 15, 18 weeks where it's just a game we play. Stay committed, and it's just what you do.
Yeah, I just figured for me, I was super young when I did it. I was there the first week going, what the hell have I gotten myself into? And then you just go, okay, it is what it is. And you just kind of roll with it at that point.
Yeah. I do remember the very first day of the US Marshal Academy, the very first day, they showed half a day, nothing but videos of police officers getting shot and killed. And I'm like, and I'd seen some of that stuff before, and it's always, you lose sleep a couple times for a couple nights after that. Even today, when you see that stuff, I hate to become a little too accustomed when you see that stuff, but it's, tragic stuff. But nonetheless, and they asked after a couple 3 hours of that, who doesn't want to be here anymore? And there's 5 or 6 people that raised their hand,
Really?
and they were out of the academy.
Wow.
Yeah, it was kind of just, hey, this is something that happens regularly. We see it with federal agents getting shootouts and officers getting shot and hurt, and you know, it's reality of what we do. It's not just at the feds. This is all law enforcement.
Yeah,
And
and
that's
that
something you have to grasp and understand and wrap your mind around and prepare yourself.
and you think you'd wrap around your mind
Yeah,
before you even got to that
you would think.
situation.
I mean,
Yeah.
I know I did,
Yeah.
but yeah, I was surprised. I was really surprised that 6 people raised their hand out of, I don't know, we had, I don't know, 40.
Interesting.
Yeah,
Interesting.
that was a little eye opening, but
Okay, so what are you doing at the Marshals? What's your job?
yeah. So primarily the marshals, they work in the court, and your first duty is to serve the court. That's to serve their warrants, serve civil process, and transport defendants to and from jail to court.
Okay.
Um,
That sounds super, super boring to me. So
it,
how was it?
it is super boring.
Okay.
That's why I'm no longer with them.
Okay.
At the time when I was here in Idaho, we were short staffed. It seemed like the Marshal Service was always short staffed. And that was the priority. There was warrants to work, but the court took priority. And we'd work warrants once in a while and get out and do some surveillance and work a few warrants and do civil process and get out of the office and do something. That happened regularly, but I mean, most everyone wanted to get out and work warrants because that's what the marshals are known for.
Right.
But unfortunately, the court took precedence, and that's just the way it rolls. So it wasn't, it was funny because my wife, I waited so long to get that job,
Right.
literally. And it was the first job I ever had that I was unhappy, and I didn't want to admit it. My wife finally said after a couple of years, you know what, you're miserable. I go, no, I'm not. This is US Marshal. I'm a Deputy US Marshal. This is the best job ever. Trying to put on this front. She's like, no, you're miserable.
Mm.
And I go, you're right. Because at the time, the Marshal was saying, well, if you want to get promoted or do this, you're gonna have to go to the southwest border and move around. And I'm in my mid 30s at this time. I'm like, absolutely not. I am not leaving Boise or Idaho anymore. I bounced around all these jobs
Yeah.
earlier, and I just, military stuff. I grew up moving all the time, and I was over that. I'm done. I'm not moving anymore. I've got to settle in and do some things here. So I find that, even my boss is like, I told him, say, I'm thinking about applying to the US Probation Office because I got to know the probation officers that worked in the same buildings I did, the federal courthouse here in Boise. So I got to know those guys. Some of them I actually went to college with. And they had an opening. And I went to my boss, and he said, I don't blame you. I do the same thing. And he actually encouraged me. And I was a good employee. I was a good teammate,
Yeah.
good employee, but
Yeah.
it just wasn't, emotionally invigorating to go to work every day. But
Okay, so before we start talking about the probation office there in Boise, you have a little thing where you're a special agent with the Air Force Reserve. How does that come about?
yeah, so back when I was in Montana, I was looking to go to grad school. I'm like, oh, I should join the reserves because it's been about 9 years since I've been. I can join the reserves, get some tuition assistance, blah, 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 blah. And I was searching around, and I somehow came across an Air Force recruiter, and they were recruiting for Office of Special Investigations for special agents, reservists. And they were looking for prior service, any military branch, and who was currently law enforcement. Well, that was me. So I applied, enlisted, and did that stuff, and started my enlistment about the time that I moved to Boise, early 2001.
Mm-hmm.
9/11 happened, obviously later that year, soon after I got married. I was with the Marshal Service, and I was doing my weekends and going back to DC for a couple weeks, doing training, this and that, and working on some local Air Force bases, doing work just on a random weekends.
But what were you doing? What were you doing?
So stateside, I was a special agent working criminal investigations.
Okay.
But there's a lot of missions for the Office of Special Investigations with the Air Force,
Okay.
not just criminal investigations. You get abroad, there's counterintelligence type stuff. There's actually probably a lot that I don't even know of. But so 9/11 happens, Afghanistan's going down. I just missed getting mobilized then. I just was in DC for the academy, a 2-week academy there, which is more administrative. Roll into 2003, soon after I transferred over to the US Probation Office, Iraq started heating up. And I told my wife, get ready, because I barely missed it after 9/11. in Afghanistan because a bunch of reservists called up, and it's so funny they're deploying all these reservists to these combat zones. Which, what about the active duty guys? Not that I cared, because I wanted, if I'm going to get activated, send me somewhere other
Yeah.
than sit stateside. But so that was heating up, and I told my wife, stand by, but stuff's going to go down. And sure enough, in March of 2003, 6 months after I started probation, I get mobilized, active duty orders for 10 months. So to the Air Force credit, coming out of the Marine Corps, I really didn't know a whole lot about the Air Force. I learned it's in my reserve time, but they immediately spun us up. We were traveling all over the country, Texas, California, South Carolina, New Jersey, training us up, combat driving, doing, exercises in New Jersey, a lot of shooting, a lot of just cool training. I'm used to the Marine Corps where you don't get a lot of training, and because they pride themselves on doing more with less. But the Air Force just has so much money and gear, and they just throw it at you in training, which is awesome. And they did a good job, and they spun us up. There's about, a dozen reservists. We were stationed down at Travis Air Force Base in California. Boom, I get orders to Iraq. Um, I guess I went there in July of 2003. So to FOL 24, I think it was, Forward Operating Location 24, which is Kirkuk Air Base in northern Iraq.
Okay. So as a special agent with the Air Force, what are you supposed to be doing? What are going to be your responsibilities once you get to Iraq?
Right. So it's not necessarily criminal. So when we were getting spun up and doing exercise, a lot of it was aimed at counterintelligence, working sources. The whole end game, to simplify it, is to protect the base. Air Force personnel, American personnel, NATO, whoever, and the aircraft. So, for example, when mortars and rockets start raining in on the base, our job is to go out into the community and start working sources. Hey, where's this coming from? Who's doing it? This and that. To make it, we were starting to, and it takes time, but we were embedded in local police offices. We started up in Kirkuk. We only had 5 agents there, and we had a major, the detachment commander was a female, Jackie Albright, awesome commander. She just she gave us marching orders, and she didn't care how we got it done. She did, but we went out. And early on in the Iraq War, it was like the Wild West. I look back, we did some stupid crap. Like, we could have got killed. But nonetheless, so during wartime, you really focused on that force protection piece. And over time, we got really embedded with the police, as well as communities and families of former Iraqi government officials that in that community. The city of Kirkuk is about like Boise. It's about 300,000-400,000. In the air bases right on the edge of town, kind of like Boise. Boise reminds me of Kirkuk, Iraq. So you embed on those communities and try to find sources. And I kind of fell into some sources. One thing we were really focused on is, in Iraq, you could go anywhere and find munitions. You could take any azimuth and just start walking. You would come across a bunker, a hole in the ground with mortar rounds, artillery, small arms. You can go anywhere, because when that government collapsed, the community started seizing all that stuff, because the military base just shut down, including jets. They drag them off and part them out. And so there's just munitions everywhere. But one of the munitions is the SA-7 Grail, which is a man-pad, which we needed to get those so they don't shoot our jets down, which, there's a couple aircraft that were hit down in Baghdad by SA-7s during that time when I was there. But nonetheless, so I had a source that had access to that, various things, that he could find that stuff for me. And we would pay the Air Force, the government. There's 2 pieces to an SA-7. There's the actual missile, and it has an infrared eyeball right here. If you take the cap off, it'll follow you around because it's looking at your heat. But to fire that thing, you needed the triggering mechanism. So we would pay $500 for the missile, cash, and $500 for a trigger mechanism. So I put out sources, and it took a while, 6 weeks, before I started getting some, and I was getting some hauls. I'd get 12, 15, 20. I think I awarded about 50 grand to random Iraqis. I'm sure the police officers that were coordinating this were taking their cut, if not all of it. But we hit cold hard cash, and I'd have to take the financial officer off the Air Force base, because the OSI agents and EOD were the only Air Force people going outside the wire. So you grab a financial officer, they're scared shitless. At 11 o'clock at night, some seedy place where we're communicating by flashlights and hooking up with these sources, kind of like some, weird buy or something, DEA, and throwing out cash and getting these missiles. So it was actually pretty cool. I used to enjoy it. But I just lucked out. I had some good sources that could provide that stuff. But that was a big deal, because it took $1,000 missile to shoot down a $40 million plane. That's all it took, right up the tailpipe as they're taking off. So that was a big focus of us outside of who's throwing mortars and rockets into the base, but to get these SA-7s out of the community, because that was the biggest threat to the Air Force assets. But
Did you just get to carry around cash with you all the time?
no, that's the financial officer did. I had to get him. No, I wasn't carrying. It wasn't that Wild West, but that would have been cool. I probably got it done a lot better. But no, we had to coordinate that. Once we had a source that, hey, I got 18 missiles, determine what they're going to bring me. Sometimes I'd inspect it first, and then we'd meet up later and do the cash.
Okay.
And we gave them a receipt. It was kind of weird. Then receipt, what is this? It's Iraq. There's no rules there, but they just saw the cash. It was cold, in 50s and 100s. It was legit. But I had a colleague who's actually a DEA agent down in Baghdad. He was a reservist too. He and I were neck and neck. We were kind of competing who could get the most, SA-7 Grill missiles. But he did a great job down in Baghdad, and he looked like an Iraqi, Hispanic guy, but great dude. But he was a DEA agent out of San Antonio.
Interesting.
Yeah. So that was kind of the tour there. Is really focused on that.
Yeah. Interesting little side tour for you.
Yeah. But we rolled in civilian cars, and just like this is how we dressed. And the first half of my tour there, and then they made us go into uniforms, but we stripped name tags off. And U.S. Air Force, there was nothing on us that identified who we were. Yeah, because we were working sources. We weren't too far from the Iranian border, and the WMD stuff was at play. So anytime that source would tell us about WMD, everything stopped because we had to find. That was the whole justification for the war. So we had to find the stuff, which we never did. But and Iranian influence that was at play too. So we're working with OGA, and DIA, and working sources, and I'd hand stuff off to them because that was their forte.
Okay.
But we were really focused on that force protection with the missiles and the immediate threats. But
okay, so you get back to Boise. You start working for the probation office. You're a probation officer. Can you explain for the audience? You and I were talking about this. Essentially, there's kind of, for lack of a better term, there's three jobs within there. Can you explain that?
Right. So in the District of Idaho, there are 94 federal jurisdictions around the country. The District of Idaho is one. Larger populated states like California, Texas might have the Northern District of California, the Southern District of California, and same with Texas and other states. But in Idaho, the whole state was the District of Idaho. In the U.S. Probation Office, we have 3 disciplines. There's the pretrial unit that handles defendants from the time of arrest up to the time of their either conviction or acquittal. That's that pretrial. So they do initial bail report, but they also supervise those defendants that are released during that time. Once they're convicted, either by plea or trial, that's when the pre-sentence unit comes in. Now, pretrial still plays supervising them. They come in and write that pre-sentence report, which is a lot of work and takes a lot of time. That's their role. Now, once a person's sentenced, whether they go to prison and they're released or they're sentenced to probation, that's when the post-conviction unit picks up that case and they supervise. And that's basically the field unit where we supervise people in the community. Pretrial does that to a smaller extent on the pretrial defendants that are released. We don't get them in the post-conviction side until they're convicted.
Okay.
If that's
makes sense. Yeah. So one of the things that you and I talked about, which I kind of wanted to have you answer on this and kind of pick your brain, is what was before I ask you this, probation officer, federal probation officer, you carrying a gun?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, here's a note to that I meant to tell you earlier. U.S. Probation is the only law enforcement agency in the judicial branch. We're judiciary employees. Everything else is executive, right? DOJ, Homeland Security, Interior, Treasury. That's all executive branch function, but that's a function of the executive branch, right?
Yeah.
To enforce the law.
But
we're unique. We're a law enforcement agency in the judicial branch. We report, technically our boss is the Supreme Court, the Chief Justice, technically. Now we have a headquarters office in DC that works out of the main court there. That's basically our boss there, but we work for the judges. They appoint us, which is very unique.
So did you have to go to another academy?
When I got hired, we didn't have an academy. We went to DC for 2 weeks, and you walked around in a suit and tie and toured the Capitol. And they exposed you to the federal courts and the processes and how it works. But it wasn't until I think 2006 maybe that we actually started an academy at the FLETC location in Charleston. So now there's an academy.
Okay. So as a probation officer carrying a firearm, how are you? Like I had to qualify, I don't know, once a quarter or whatever. You got to do the same thing?
Yeah, we did. So since we had to go through training and get qualified and spend a couple weeks, to get OC certified. And
Okay.
and firearms. Yeah, so we did. But now they do that at the academy.
Okay. Okay. So if you're in the judicial branch, what pay scale are you on? I'm gonna kind of nerd out
Yeah.
here. Are you a
So
GS
no,
or
we're not GS. We're CL levels. So
CL?
yeah,
Okay.
I don't know what that stands for, but GS would only go step 1 to 10. Is that what it is? Or it's not
No,
very many steps.
no. I mean GS. I think I started as a 4 when I was a.
Well, not the like your GS 4 step something.
Yeah,
Yeah,
4. But you get to like a 13 step 10.
yeah. Like we can get up to like step 60. Like in
Okay, so you just CL and
yeah.
then you
So
just
like
steps.
officers start at a CL 26, which is like a GS
Ah,
7.
okay. Okay.
So, but there's all these steps, and
Okay.
you get them more often. But it's all controlled by my own office. It's not controlled by DC. So
Okay.
pay and hiring all goes through Boise, not DC.
Okay. So, well, let me ask you this
So a
then.
little different than some DOJ stuff.
Yeah, a little bit, but how did it work? So, like, I can't even remember, right? So, I started off as a 7 as an agent. You're there for a year. You get promoted to a 9. Then I think it's now we had didn't have I think 11. Then there was a little bit of break to 12, and then there was certainly a break of a few years to get to a 13. How does it work for you? Like, what's a
Yeah,
journeyman? What's a
yeah.
journeyman
It's
probation?
it's basically so you get hired at a anywhere 25 or 26. A journeyman is a CL 28, and
Okay.
it takes about 3 years to get to a CL 28.
Okay.
So right now in Idaho, if you have at least 2 years experience doing anything that's qualifiable,
Mm-hmm.
you'll start about, I don't know, 50, 55 grand.
Uh-huh.
And after 3 years, you'll work up to a CL 28, which, gosh, I'm kind of guessing now it's 70.
Okay.
So that's your journeyman.
Okay.
So if you become a specialist outside of a line probation officer, like you might be a mental health specialist or a search and seizure specialist, some specialist, you can go up to a 29,
Mm-hmm.
or excuse me, yeah, 29.
Okay.
So and then if you become a mid-level supervisor, then you can go to a 29, 30.
Okay.
Yeah. And then in my case, when I got promoted to deputy chief, that's a totally separate level. You get paid on the judge's pay scale, and that comes out of DC. It doesn't come out of local budget, which is weird, but
Judge's pay scale. That
yeah,
sounds great.
that's legit when you get a judge's pay scale. Now, I was nowhere near them, but I'm on the same pay scale,
Yeah.
which,
Okay.
but probation officers, I mean, I know all feds, especially when you get in special agent stuff, but federal probation pays well. It's, I mean, yeah, it pays well. It's a good job to have in
Okay.
terms of just the benefits, but just the work you have, and we can talk about that later. But
Yeah.
it's a good job. It's
Okay, so before we talk about what you did as a probation officer, I wanted to ask you, and we talked about this before we began recording. I always wondered what the relationship is for those people you're describing, your probation officers, but your pretrial people, all those things. What's your relationship between the court? What's your relationship between an arresting agency? What's your relationship between the defense attorney? And the reason I ask is I always found you guys in particular in Idaho, obviously I'm biased, but I thought you guys were great because I'm dealing with bad guys and you guys are always typically recommending these guys get detained. Whereas I had a case down in Vegas and I've got a guy that's a convicted murderer. He's dealing drugs, he's dealing guns, and she lets him out. Never talks to me, never calls me or anything else. But you guys did an awesome job. You guys were always calling, going, "Hey, tell me about this guy. What's the deal with this report? What does it say?" So
right.
explain that relationship to me.
Yeah, and that's a good point because like I said earlier, there's 94 different jurisdictions. Even though we all follow the same policy and procedure and guidance on how to do our jobs, the districts are vastly different. There's very liberal districts that focus on they want to get everybody out of jail, straight up.
Yeah.
And there's other districts that are very conservative. Like, no, Idaho, for example, we're in the lower 10 districts out of 94 in terms of our release rate on the pretrial stage. Other districts, they release 6 out of 10.
Mm.
Now you have to look at the types of cases, but it's still there's some very liberal release policies and more conservative, and it's just different judges have different views and lean different ways, and the pretrial office and probation, we have to present the risks they pose and make a recommendation to the judge, and the judge doesn't always follow what we say, whether we ask for release or detain. At the end of the day, it's the judge's call. But our relationship with the agents, it was always like this. If we've got the government upset with us and defense, we've done our job. It was kind of a joke because, they're detained, then defense is upset, and if they're released, then government or the agent's upset. Totally understand.
Yeah.
But the pretrial stuff there's a lot of case law, a lot of guidance on what we do. And at the end of the day, it's the judge's call. The government has a role in that too, especially on the prelim or a detention hearing, to get information to the judge that we may not have.
Yeah.
Especially with the instant offense and the charge and the conduct, which
Right.
we're supposed to take into account, but we're not supposed to reference it in our investigation. That's the government's job. That's where it gets weird. It gets frustrating for the government at times and agents.
But behind the scenes, is this right? I mean, behind the scenes, it wasn't just like you guys were just calling me. You guys were also calling the defense attorney as well.
Yeah, we try to be very transparent and
Okay.
talk to everybody, but include family. We're interviewing family and sisters and husbands and whatever, employers. We want to paint that picture so the judge can make an informed decision, good or bad. Here's what we found out. That's why at the end of the day, the judge makes the call. We present the information, the government does their job, defense theirs. At the end of the day, the judge makes their call.
Okay.
And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. But generally, I know the judges value the information we provide because it does give them that picture so they can make an informed decision. That's really what it's about.
Okay.
But we will, in Idaho, we will lean. If there's a risk to the community, we're going to lean. No. Why would we present a risk?
Right.
But sometimes, we're in that gray area. Let's give them a shot. Sometimes they're successful. And if they're not, there's very low tolerance on pretrial on defendants that are pending court or pending a trial. If there's any they're back in jail.
Yeah.
But, every once in a while you hear about these cases around the country, some horror story where they're released and then they go out and kill 3 people. And there's been some of those cases, they call them sentinel events, that drives a lot of policy. But it's not a perfect system. And unfortunately, that's going to happen once in a while. But we tend to err on the side of let's lean towards community safety and not recommend release.
Is it different in other districts? I didn't notice a whole lot. There's really not any bail per se or bond. I mean, every once in a while somebody may put up like a house, but it was very unusual. Is that
It's rare, yeah. In the
Okay.
district, I've seen like a surety bond, but it's really uncommon.
Is that uncommon here in Idaho, or is
Yes.
that uncommon?
I
in the
can't
other-
speak. I don't hear about it a lot.
Okay.
When I used to go to trainings, which is a lot, I don't hear a lot about it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think typically on some white collar cases, maybe there's a lot of restitution. They might try to, lean some assets or something just to make sure they show back up to court.
Yeah.
But general, I've never experienced myself seeing that.
Okay.
I think I've heard about it once.
Okay.
But that's about it.
All right. So, what was your day to day? What did you do as a probation officer?
Yeah, so I was in field operations my whole career. So working a caseload, 50, 60 offenders. So out of the Boise office, we covered the southwest part of the state from Riggins, which a lot of people may not grasp that, but Riggins all the way over to Sun Valley, down to the Shilpai Reservation on the Nevada border. But Nampa, Caldwell, some of the towns that are pretty hotbeds for caseload. We talked about it earlier. When I first started, we didn't have this, but in the last 15 years, we've gone to a dynamic risk assessment. The big question is who do you give your resources to, and who do you because there's low risk, medium risk, and high risk, to simplify it.
Okay.
The high risk guys, you have to contain that risk, and gals. That's the whole job, is to contain that risk so they're not victimizing people. And that's where a lot of resources go, or the medium and high. You want to just leave the lows alone. Hey, give them some direction. You're monitoring them. You might see them sporadically, but the high risk guys you're seeing weekly. The low risk guys, you might see them every 2 months or 3 months, depending on their scenario. Hey, if they got a job and they're married and they have a steady income and they're just paying restitution, they don't have any issues, but for their conviction, they just made a bad choice one day. Okay. But it goes up through the continuum. But we use this tool to establish that risk. And you got to get out. We're in their homes. We're talking to their neighbors, their employers. You just got to mesh yourself. And this takes some time. It's kind of like working a source, kind of, in your line of work, or even my Air Force stuff, where you got to get yourself into their sphere of living. And they need to know that, because you can't have influence unless you're up in their business every day. And it's not about being a jerk. You're being respectful. These are people you're going to know for the next 3, 5, 10 years, sometimes the rest of their lives. So you got to work on being respectful. You can be firm. And if you want to be an ass, okay, it's not illegal, but I can play that if you want.
Yeah.
I'm trying to keep you out of jail.
Yeah.
But when I start trying harder than you, that's a problem.
Yeah.
But you're really, a lot of that focuses on those medium high risk cases, because those are the guys and gals that are going to do damage to the community. And that's where you want to get in there. And
So
get
you're
them.
actually going out into the field, talking to them, talking to family,
Oh yeah,
dealing.
doing unannounced visits at night, 10 o'clock at night, Saturday mornings. Following, we did surveillance. Search and seizure was a big deal in Idaho. We've got some good officers right now working. In the last 10, 15 years, we really got our search and seizure program rocking. I mean, that's a big piece of accountability. And they need to know that.
Yeah.
We've got a good surveillance program where these high risk guys spending 6, 8 hours watching them. Where are they going? Well, there's
What's
some other
this?
stuff I'd speak to that I don't want to, but I don't want them to know. But so we need. If you wake up every day as a probation officer in a quest for the truth, that's what you're finding out. You're verifying what they're saying. Are they really have the job? Do they really have the income source they're saying? Do they really staying clean? Do they really have the pro-social friends? I've always kind of coined it as you wake up just trying to find the truth. You're trying to verify everything because, believe it or not, criminals aren't always truthful. So I'm going to watch you and I'm going to talk to your friends and your family and see what they say. And it's surprising how much friends and family they want their particular offender to do well. So a lot of time they're on the side of the probation officer because they want this person to be successful. And you can get the family involved in that, friends, employers to help you out because you're not babysitting these people 24/7.
Yeah.
You got 55 other people you're supervising. That's when it's success, is when you've got those people involved.
Yeah. What is the failure rate, or maybe to be optimistic, what is the success rate that you have as a probation officer?
Right. In Idaho, in any given year, it's about 35% are revoked. So that's a success rate of what, 65%,
Okay.
give or take a little bit.
Yeah.
People that end their term of supervision successfully. So we term it this way. If you had 200 cases that were closed during this calendar year, 35% of those would be closed via revocation or where they were revoked of
Okay.
supervision and
Okay.
most likely went back to jail.
What was the main reason why somebody would be successful?
I nail it down to two. One is mindset. A lot of people come out. The people that are really, at day one, you can tell because they could be 45 years old and they're tired of spending in and out of prison for the last 25 years of their adult life. And they come out and say, you know what, I'm done with this lifestyle and I'm nailing it. I'm going to go find a job. I'm going to do this and this, and they're off and running. Awesome. So there's a lot of it's mindset. And some of them want it, but they don't quite how to do it. You can give them some help, whether you help coach them with some job search stuff, or you get them into a job search program, or maybe some mental health because they don't know how to manage relationships that are toxic or whatever. And you help some little things out, or obviously drug or alcohol abuse if you need to get them some help there to kind of work through that. So a lot of it's mindset, but a lot of it too, the biggest one on the risk factor tool that we use is who they hang out with, their social network. And I'll tell them the very first day they come into the office or I see them at their house and say, here's the deal. If you have crappy friends, you're not going to make it. Let's talk about that. Who are you hanging out with? We can't go back to the block. I know it's tough, especially with younger offenders, especially the gang guys and gals going back to the neighborhood. It's really, really tough to get out of that. And to a degree, some reservation cases too, going back to that same community, you got to get them out of there if you can. But nonetheless, to answer your question, it's social networks. If you have crappy friends, you are not going to make it. If it's the same friends you had before that don't care about you and they're going to continue to use and commit crimes or whatever, we might as well just get the war started now because you're not going to make it.
Yeah.
If you can get them away from that social network, even if they're just by themselves, and try to find, hey, why don't you get into fishing or camping or playing golf, or what do you like to do? And someone like, I don't know, I've never done anything. Well, God, so why don't you get a fishing license, man? I can point out some place to go fishing, and you get some pro-social activities and find some friends that do that aren't a bunch of knuckleheads. But it's all about that social network. It's no different than our kids.
Yeah.
We're the teenagers. We want them hanging out with good people. I remember my mom saying, "No, you can't hang out with them. They're a bad influence." Yeah, whatever, mom. Well, she was right. I mean, I'd probably be in jail if I continued hanging out with that guy. But so it's really that mindset and that social network.
Do you have
Is what
any
I'm saying.
do you have any success stories that kind of stick out in your mind?
Yeah, there's been a good amount. I've got one. A guy showed up. This is early 2000s. Like it's probably one of your cases. It was a drug case, and he showed up in my office on pretrial. At the time, I was supervising pretrial cases in addition to the post-conviction cases. But he shows up and he was looking weird and acting. And he was an older guy. At the time, he's probably in his 40s, and I was in my early 30s. But I say, hey, lift up your arms, lift up your shirt sleeves. And sure enough, he had track marks on both arms. I'm like, buddy. His name is Chuck. Good dude. But I'm like, this the low tolerance on the pretrial stage. I'm going to have to get a warrant. Literally, why don't you just sit in the chair and let me do the warrant? Because we got to get, for your own safety, I need to get you off the street and in custody, because this isn't going to work for you. I mean, once you get intravenous drug use, you're at the peak of some drug use. And I got the warrant. He got sentenced and did some time and came out, and I supervised him when he came out a couple years later. He's one of those guys that came out. He's probably mid 40s and said, I'm done with this stuff. My mom's old and failing. I need to be there for her. I have skills. He was a carpenter. He goes, I just want to work. I'm done with this lifestyle. And off to the races he went for the next 3 years. I'd see him every once in a while. His mom was very involved. And that was, God, he probably finished his supervision period back in 2006 or 7. And he calls me every January 2nd, and it's 2024, leaves me a message, or I get on the phone and talk to him because that's his sobriety date. That was the date I got the warrant, was that day, January 2nd.
Yeah.
And he goes, that was his, anyway, he calls me every January 2nd to either leave me a message or talk to him. I mean, he's a great dude, very successful, just a hardworking guy. His mom's still alive, believe it or not. That was one success story, because I hear from that guy all the time.
Yeah.
But every once in a while, I'll run into someone in the community and I recognize them. They're, Kevin, what's up? And God, I really appreciate you giving me the chance to come out from Jersey and, and out of prison. And because at the time I approved it, and I see this guy all the time, and he's got some trucking business, very successful. But he needed to get out of that gang culture back in Jersey. Yeah. His term, not mine, because I didn't know the case. Yeah. It was a Jersey case. And he came out here. We took a risk. I said, well, come on out. He had a brother out here that played basketball at BSU. Come on out. I'll give you a chance. And he was off to the races. Never looked back. And now he's got a, multi-million-dollar business and doing well. So, but you hear those stories. Yeah. It's in everybody if they want it.
Yeah.
Some may struggle because they need the skills there. But hey, if you're willing to try, we'll help you out. But
before I start asking you about promoting, I'm assuming at some point you went, I'm staying, because you don't transfer anymore, right?
Yeah.
Why? Did you find your home? What was going on?
Yeah, my wife's from Idaho, and I grew up in Coeur d'Alene, but I bounced around. But I'm from Montana originally. But once we got into Boise, my wife had a good job that was paying well with the school district, and I really enjoyed probation. And we're not moving anywhere. I mean, my wife's not a big mover. I'm used to doing it. So we just, now this is where we're going to be, and so we just settled in, and probation was a great job. I really enjoyed it. I had great colleagues, great bosses. We had good equipment, good training. It's just a good agency to work for. So I was pretty fortunate, really.
What made you decide to promote? You become a supervisor, and then you end up as a deputy chief here. But what made you decide to promote?
Funny thing is, I didn't have a plan. I had gone to grad school, but I was going to get my MBA only because I was preparing for retirement. Maybe I'll go do something else. Because at the time, you try to read the tea leaves, and not a lot of people left Idaho, so there's not a lot of turnover. You're like, well, this person will be probably the next supervisor, and then this person will do that. This person will be the next chief. You always have these tea leaves. Well, it never turns out. And one day, a supervisor position opened up, and I'd only been there 4 or 5 years, and I'm like, I'll just apply just to go through the process, just to learn something. And because it was a big deal in our district at the time to have it was a brand new position. So we had like 8 or 9 people apply. And these are people that were training me when I got hired. And I'm like, I think this guy will probably get it, or this gal. And, they're both know what they're doing. And I go through the process and I get it. I'm the junior guy. And I'm like, wow, okay. Well, as I was going through the process, even during the interview, I told myself, you have some experience here. You could do this. Why? I wasn't necessarily belittling myself, but I just wasn't grasping my own experience, managing people and processes, knowing your job well. I'm like, no, I can be competitive with this. Matter of fact, after the fact, when I asked for some feedback, I go, why did you select me? I mean, you have this person, this person, this person, who I just assumed one of them would get it. You know what they said? They said, you get along with everybody. Outside of competencies, I knew my job well and things like this. And I was always leaning forward, taking on new tasks, not for any reason other than to challenge myself. But what tipped it was everything being even amongst a lot of us. You get along with everybody.
Okay, so along with that, you get along with everybody. How is it then, as you're the junior guy and now supervising people that are senior to you?
Yeah, it was tough, real tough. It took a couple years to but I was creating my own problems. And my boss at the time said, I can't remember his term, something about every issue is not a fight. Just if this guy's upset about not getting promoted, just let that roll. That's his problem, not yours. The guy was trying to fix that, which you can't do that.
Yeah.
It took a couple. I mean, it's some people that come. I had one guy who was a close friend of mine, said, hey, congratulations. You weren't the most deserving, but congrats anyway. I'm like, wow, okay, bud.
Yeah.
But I just said, okay, it's time to just commit myself to the team and prove myself that I'm looking out for them and I can do the job. And it took a little bit. I had a couple outliers that,
Yeah.
but it's after a while I earned their respect, and it was all good.
Where
I
do you
mean,
think you got your leadership qualities from? I mean, I'm assuming you did a good job. If I was probably to talk to some of the people that worked under you, I'd hoping that they'd say you did a good
yeah,
job. But where did that come from? Did it start from when you were, your background in the military family, and then through the Marines? Where did it originate from?
well, the Marine Corps, you're very mission focused, and you got to be in a team environment. You look out for each other. That's what it's all about, and that's more on a kind of you know masculine level. It's a very walk the walk environment, and if you can't walk the walk, you're ostracized. I mean, if you can't PT and keep up, or you don't, if you
Yeah.
the people that don't fit in on the team, usually through lack of effort, are usually cold pretty quickly, and you just learn that you got to lean in and look out for each other. And that's what I can, going back to the get along with everyone. That's a big deal. Relationships are very. I used to not think that way until actually soon after I became a supervisor. I learned how important relationships are. Not just getting along with people, dealing with difficult prosecutors, difficult judges. It's everything. If you want to get things done, you have to have relationships. Know people over at DEA or up on the Marshals, or with Boise PD or whoever, so you can reach out and get things done. We're all trying to go. We're going in the same direction here, and you can't go that together unless you got some relationships going. But to your point about the leadership stuff, I don't know. I don't. That's a good question. I don't know where it came from. I just knew what success, how functioning teams work, and I
Well,
was
I asked.
mindful.
I'm starting to focus in on this a little bit, especially with people that were supervisors. Do you think leadership is innate or learned, or both?
I For me, it was learned. I think. I mean,
Okay.
there's some people that are naturally, they just have a presence,
Hmm.
but that doesn't mean they're good leaders. They have a presence. They're influential. It could be negative, but I guess that's still leadership, right? I think it's both myself. But are there people that are born with some attributes more than others? Oh yeah, I think so too.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of it's learned. You mature. I mean, if I was promoted to a supervisor at 25, I don't know if I could have done it. I
Mm.
mean, at 35 or whatever old I was, I can't remember now,
Yeah.
40 maybe, a little different.
Yeah.
When for me, I think I was a late bloomer,
Hmm.
maturity wise, in terms of taking ownership of stuff and being confident what I was doing.
How did you finally deal with the people that were mad that you had gotten promoted over them? How
I,
did you finally resolve that?
you have to have a conversation about it.
Okay.
Don't let it fester unspoken. I said, hey, I remember one particular guy, and you would know who he is. He was up north, and he wasn't mad at me. He was mad that at the chief at the time that he wasn't selected, but he exuded it constantly. He was just always with a chip on his shoulder. Like, dude, I hear you. I can't do anything to help you, but you need to work through this, because how you respond to a setback will define you. So right now, it's been 2 years now, and you're still will speak negatively how you didn't get promoted. You've kind of established your reputation now, because you can't get over it.
Yeah.
There's going to be other opportunities, and there were, and he didn't chose not to go for them. He probably would have got one if you'd done it. That
Yeah.
happened to a couple people, and both of them I know you would know. One guy, I mean, he retired still bitter that he didn't get promoted 6 years before. I
Mm.
mean, it's the strangest thing, and
Yeah.
it's just one of those things where, hey, people are watching. How you handle the setback will define. I've had that conversation with numerous people.
Mm.
It's not bad to kick dirt for a couple of days and be disappointed. Okay, let's regroup here and wait for another opportunity,
Yeah.
because I'm sure 3 or 4 of those 9 people that applied could have done the job well. I just happened to rise slightly above in their choice with what they're looking for at the time.
Yeah.
Not that I'm any better than them, but and I never. It just takes time, but they got over it.
Yeah.
I mean, it was never against me. They're
Right.
more upset at the panel and who made the decision, and
Yeah.
so yes, but you gotta. It's a tough. And I used to teach new supervisors for the judiciary in the new supervisor program, and that's was the biggest challenge for new supervisors, is how to manage people that were once your colleagues, which you've experienced, I'm sure. But one of those, how to make that transition, and where people didn't want you to get promoted and they're angry with you when it's not about you. It's you applied just like they did.
Yeah.
But that's biggest angst issue for new supervisors, is how to handle that transition.
Right.
And a lot of people, man, they really get wound up in it, and it really bothers them, and they just detach. It's their issue to get used to.
Yeah.
Just support them, communicate, you know, be nice, be firm about expectations and everything like that, and just roll.
Yeah.
That's all you can do.
Okay, last couple questions. Two of them I always ask. One of them is going to be a little bit different for you, but did being in law enforcement affect your family?
Well, I didn't get married till I was 34,
Okay.
so I've been in law enforcement a little bit. No, not really. My
Okay.
family, my wife and my kids like it that I was a federal law enforcement officer, probation officer. They liked it.
Uh-huh.
Wasn't doing a lot of shift work. I was working weekends and nights, but not a lot of shift work. Now,
Yeah.
going back, if I was working at the sheriff's office, working shifts and weekends,
Hmm.
that probably would have been a challenge for the kids, or my wife. You're not there for Christmas or New Year's or birthdays because you have to work, or, I can see. And if I was married when I was overseas in the combat zone, that would have been very challenging
Yeah.
if I had kids. And
Yeah.
there's some colleagues I had over there that had teenage kids, and they're just dealing with teenage issues, but you're 5,000 miles away and trying to manage that. I was thankful I was single at that time, because that would have been. I had a new respect for married people in the military after experiencing some of my close friends that were just really challenged with what was going on back home. They weren't there to handle it and deal with it, and
Yeah.
whether it was kids or spouse or. But law enforcement, there wasn't any huge effect. No, I mean, my wife worried about me when working patrol and working midnight. I worked a lot of nights and swings, but
Yeah, I mean,
um,
and like you said, yours was a little bit different situation just because you weren't on shift and maybe you're not working a whole bunch of things. But la- this will get into one of the questions I always ask, which will be interesting because can you look back from when you started, when you were in the Marines up until the time that you retired? I mean, Marines not so much, but when you start getting into law enforcement, especially when you're in probation, you're dealing with not the best people in society. Do you, can you look back and have you changed your view on how you see people in society?
for sure, yeah. I was telling some people, I retired obviously, but I'm working at a sport retailer now, and some of my young colleagues, they ask about that career, and I tell them nothing that humans do, like some big thing makes the news or some social media about something did something funky. Nothing surprises me anymore. Nothing blows my mind anymore about what people do, whether it's sexual deviancy or criminal acts or just deviant behavior or just brazen whatever. Nothing surprises me anymore. Like, well, that's what humans do. I mean, even in probation work, there's some officers that they refused, not that they could per se, but they had a lot of issues with managing and supervising sex offenders, child porn
Yeah,
guys.
yeah,
But they would make it personal. I always just, it is what it is. I've never, I mean, but some were, vocal about, I can't do this. I can't do sex offenders. Well, why? Well, I don't agree with their conduct. Well, you don't agree with drug dealing and homicide and violent crime. I mean, I always kind of pondered that. I respected it,
yeah,
but you can't just say that as a probation officer. You have to have some of those cases. Let's work through that and
yeah.
just not make it personal and just deal with them as people and what they're supposed to do. And I always found that interesting, and I don't know how to explain that, but
But
um,
it's interesting the answer you gave because it's like, hey, just gotta nothing surprises you anymore. But
right.
do you? I don't want to say it's not a paranoia, right? But do you look at people different in society? Like, for example, a lot of cops will go into restaurants and go, "I always sit with my back to the wall," right? You've seen a lot of people. You've dealt with a lot of people.
Yeah,
Do you have a jaded sense of how people are?
there's some. Yeah, I tell my
Okay.
wife, I go, that guy's on somebody's caseload, or that girl. I mean, you can pick them out, and I'm sure you could too in a lot of people. And I don't. It's not a negative thing, and
Yeah.
I try to find the good in people, but there's a lot of knuckleheads out there and some dangerous people. But I do things like that. Random people, that guy's on someone's caseload. You can tell.
Yeah.
I can. At
Yeah.
least I think I can. And I want so bad to go up and talk to him and say, "Hey, you ever been convicted?" Or, I don't, but we were just on vacation last week over in Western Washington, San Juan Islands, and here comes a bunch of people, and all my friends with another family go, "That's caseload right there, all four of them, guarantee it."
Yeah.
And anyway, it's kind of a joke, but there's some jaded, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. There's a lot of nasty people out there that would like nothing more to victimize another human being.
Yeah.
It's not about your own decision to use drugs or steal stuff, but just truly, there's some ill intent people in the
Yeah.
world, and
Yeah. For
you know,
sure.
we all look out for those things and try to be wary of. I don't necessarily put my back so I can see the door. I I'm conscious of it. I'm always looking around who's coming in the door at a restaurant or whatever, but I'm not paranoid. But
Yeah.
um, yeah, a little jaded.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Last question for you. You've been in a lot of agencies.
Yeah,
So if somebody's watching you, somebody's watching this interview and they want to go into law enforcement, what's your advice for somebody like that?
I would support it. I think it's a great career. Especially the issues what 5 6 years ago pre-pandemic, the whole social. We had the riots and stuff, and you know agencies, including us, it was getting hard to find applicants. We were still finding them, but just this kind of cultural turn on law enforcement based on some things that were occurring, which I don't hear that as much anymore. I don't know what your experience is on whether agencies are still struggling to hire. Um, I would totally. Matter of fact, I've got a couple young people now that I'm kind of mentoring a little bit that they're getting ready to graduate college or high school and want to get a criminal justice degree, or they want to go into law enforcement. I've had a lot of discussions with them, the pros and cons of it, but it's a great job.
Yeah.
I would do it. I wouldn't change it one bit. I mean,
No, neither would I.
except maybe take that initial marshal's office with it. I'm kidding. No, I would. It all turns out.
Yeah.
I had a good career and I was super fortunate and learned a lot of things, did some cool stuff, and I had a fortunate career. I feel lucky.
Yeah.
Yeah. I wish I could have kept going, but I hit the age max. They made me leave. So
Yeah.
Yeah, I would totally support it.
Okay.
Yeah, I wish. I think my opinion, and you kind of see it already. A lot of the agencies or parts of the country, especially some of the larger metro areas, a little more liberal. That were the whole defund police stuff. Well, you see it coming full circle now.
Yeah.
At least I have. I'm not following it closely, but Minneapolis or what, just communities there. No, we need more police. You've cut them, and now we have crime is rampant, and homelessness, and our city looks like crap, and
Yeah.
just what I've heard, that you kind of see a little shift, things coming around. But even in probation, prior, I don't know, mid 2015 or so, we used to get, we had an opening in Boise or we'd get 25, 30 applicants from across the country, and then we'd interview maybe 10 or 12. Now, before I left, we'd maybe get 12 applicants and interview 5.
Mm.
We're still finding really good candidates and officers that we hired, but we just don't have the pools and that we once did. And I assume it's kind of related to some shifts in cultural view of law enforcement.
That's good that you were still having good quality applicants.
Yeah,
though.
a couple times we were really worried about it.
Yeah.
I'm like, God, we're only interviewing 4. We need 2 out of here. And luck, we had like 3 awesome candidates. Just it seemed we're getting them. It's just smaller numbers.
Yeah.
Which I hope that improves.
Yeah.
Because probation work, LE work, whatever it is, those are some good jobs. I mean, it's for the right people. It's not for everyone.
No, it isn't for everybody, but yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
You're right.
So I hope that gets better.
Yeah.
Because there's nothing wrong with it. It's good stuff.
Kevin, great conversation. Really appreciate it. Thank
Thanks,
you.
Dallas. Thanks for having me. I appreciate
Yeah.
it. Yeah.